All right. So it says we're going. Okay. It looks like we are live.
Excellent.
All right. So again, for those who may not yet know you, please introduce yourself and what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Sure. I'm the OSRDwarf. Folks have probably seen me on X. Some people perhaps would just assume they didn't see me on X, but if you're based, you probably like me. Um, I also do work on game content. Longtime gamer, love it. Recently started creating some materials. Most of my work, though, has been at the Red Room. The Red Room has a Discord server, and I started creating short content on the Discord server there. Miguel Ribeiro, who is the guy who's kind of the head of the Red Room, along with his wife Sylvia, and he's written all that content, that great content over there.
Mm-hmm.
Folks who are wondering who I might be talking about, this is the guy behind the Wretched role-playing game and the various Wretched books, like Wretched Bastards, Wretched Interbellum, Wretched Darkness, etc. And he has a new game system called Red, which came, interestingly enough, out of Darker. And it's a simplified system that doesn't use classes, it uses archetypes. And so character advancement is done differently. It's meant to be a little grittier and more realistic. It's taking it to the modern OSR. And that's basically the kind of games that they are writing right now. And I've created a lot of content for Darker. I've created a lot of content for New Flesh. I've created a lot of content for Savage Swords. And I've created some content from some of the other games along the way, but none of that has actually been published anywhere other than on the Discord server yet.
Okay. Okay. So now I'm more familiar with Wretched. That's how I got exposed to the Red Room. Somebody recommended the Wretched RPG, and I bought that and a couple of setting books. What's the major differences between Wretched and Red?
Oh, yes. Well, the biggest difference is that whereas Wretched is class-based, Red does not have a notion of classes. Rather, you have archetypes, which represent a thematic bundle of skills, advantages, and disadvantages tied to a particular character type. So, for instance, you might choose an archetype type of a private investigator. And so the private investigator would have certain skills that are available to him at character creation. He would get a free perk. That's what they call advantages in Red. He'd get a
Okay.
free perk that comes from a list that private investigators would have access to, stuff like that. Or alternatively, maybe your character is a mercenary. That's another archetype. Or maybe your character is a hustler. That's yet another archetype. Now, some of the archetypes are tied specifically to game worlds. So, like, you do have some archetypes and some perks that are, for instance, peculiar to New Flesh, which is the Red version of the older Wretched New Flesh game. For those who have been following the Red Room for a while, one of Miguel's earlier materials was his setting of Aladad, which was based on the Interzone from the pardon me, that was based on Interzone from the David Lynch movie Naked Lunch. And
Right. Got it.
if you've ever watched Naked Lunch, that's where the influence is. But it is more broadly a biopunk or cyberpunk setting. I will say it is more similar to the Sprawl. For those who are familiar with the works of William Gibson, it's more similar to the Sprawl than it is to later works by folks like Kulik or John Williams. It's not. It's definitely not Japanese style cyberpunk either. It's grittier. It's more truly the high tech, low life, but even the high tech part. Like if you've read the original short story, Johnny Mnemonic, it's much more like the short story Gibson wrote than it is like the movie. Um, that's why I think, you know, generally speaking, Miguel prefers to call it biopunk because there is a strong biological element. There is a cosmic horror element, which, of course, if you watch the David Lynch movie, there's that kind of
Yeah.
weird
It's very
exist. Yeah,
organic. It's not very
yeah,
mechanical.
yeah. Now he does have the mechanical stuff too, but it's primarily what they would call, I guess you would call biopunk. But again, if you read Gibson's work, a lot of Gibson's work has that kind of edge to it as well, whereas it's as much about biological modification as it is about mechanical parts. So, um, oh, hey, I see Hunter's joined us.
Yeah, yeah. Hunter's
Um,
in the stream. Glad to see you,
Hello.
sir.
So yeah, so that's New Flesh, and New Flesh was the first of the books that started incorporating some of my material. I had actually been influenced to write the material when I joined the Discord server by the fact that they had a not safe for work channel that was going sadly unused. Um, so I decided I would use it. And initially, I
Yeah.
just posted some images with some kind of a little bit of text associated with them that was designed to kind of provoke a response or some thoughts about how could I use this in a game. But as time went on, it became more elaborate and the images started being accompanied by uh, various little pieces of short writing that could be considered an adventure seed or a mood piece. Are you familiar with Cult Divinity Lost?
I am. I don't own a copy myself, but I am passingly familiar with the universe. And many of your writing snippets on the Discord remind me of sort of the opening of Lovecraft stories, where it's often couched in terms of like a journal entry or a diary that's been
Right.
kind of thing. You know, it's the old school equivalent of found footage.
Pretty much that was the goal. The goal was to give stuff that could serve as the basis for an adventure or an inspiration for creating a character type or maybe a villain or a monster type. And it's also atmospheric. It's intended to get you into the setting too. That's why I mentioned Cult Divinity Lost. Cult Fourth Edition does, I mean, the first 20 pages of the book are basically images and short snippets of text designed to pull you into the world. And we've incorporated that now into the darker update. So New Flesh was the first time my material actually got published alongside Miguel's. Then we did Savage Swords, which was the red system update of Wretched Bastards. And it is, whereas Wretched Bastards had various races, this one is really focused on humans and is much more classically sword and sorcery. So if you were to read old works by Robert E. Howard or Fritz Lieber, Savage Swords would feel very familiar. And there was some material that I had written for both Wretched Bastards and later for Savage Swords included in there as well. But a huge amount of my material, because I have a fondness for horror role playing games that goes back to my first acquaintance with Call of Cthulhu back in the 80s.
Nice.
A lot of that ended up being for darker, and Miguel just decided to heck with it. I need to do an update anyway, and I'm just going to pull a bunch of your stuff in. So if the new darker book seems ridiculously large, oh dude, halfling lore. Yeah, look who showed up.
Yeah, I downloaded Darker, the new version, in preparation for this, and I was like, "Oh, there's no way I'm going to read this whole thing in a week." It's 600 pages of stuff. That
it's
is
a
a
lot of
beefy text.
it's a lot of material. You get a lot of stuff. You get a lot of value for the money with this because you not only have um, all the rules, all the scenarios, you also have all this material that can inspire you to create your own adventures based on them, or that can help you get into the setting. And it includes a foreword by Miguel and a foreword by me, and where we talk about what makes modern horror RPGs what they are. Um, it is a very stark game. We have played some sessions online that people can go to the Red Room YouTube channel and watch, um, where you can see how a group of people might play the setting. Darker has options. Darker, you can either choose to do it straight dark horror, modern horror, in which case probably most of the characters will end up dead, and
Go
but
figure.
well, it's like Call of Cthulhu, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like if you really do it strictly, most people are not going to survive the experience. The other option is to take it more down a dark fantasy uh, route, where your characters have a better chance of survival as long as you're not so foolish as to confront the enemy directly, because most of the things in Darker are too strong for ordinary people to confront them.
Now that's an interesting thread I'd like to pull out a little bit, because I think there is a very substantive difference between those two styles of horror. One in which you portray non-heroic characters, normal people, which is much more the Call of Cthulhu experience, versus a person of, well, if not heroic, of heroic capabilities, a very capable person. It's almost I almost see it as a similar difference between, say, Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green, where Delta Green you're playing highly trained and skilled agents and high up
Right.
organizations of all types. What do
Yeah,
you think is the difference?
Darker gives you the option to do both,
Okay.
because it's really going to come down to your equipment and your preparedness. So, like for instance, if a game master was to build his campaign, say around the Sentinel Initiative, which is an organization that is very similar to the SCP Foundation, or Bureau 13, or other fictional underground secret organizations that deal with the paranormal, right? If you choose to run it as a Sentinel Initiative campaign, you're probably going to have characters who, because of equipment and preparation, are more prepared to confront the darkness. If, on the other hand, you're running it like a typical, like slasher movie type episode, where, you've got a group of characters who are, say, trapped in a building late at night for various reasons, and suddenly there's somebody murdering people around them, and they're going to be less capable. I had a session that we did, um, that was run by Miguel, where we were basically investigating a haunted hotel, and it was a TPK. The whole party died because we were ordinary people confronting an extraordinarily dangerous situation. On the other hand, we've had scenarios where characters survive because it's a different kind of scenario. The characters are more capable, or they were better prepared for the situation. So it really depends on how you want to run the game. And there's even the other option, which is to go the route of Elohim. And I'm not going to say very much about Elohim. Elohim is kind of an alternative setting to the default setting. Like, the default setting is based on the silence of God. So evil things are real and they exist. And for whatever reason, God remains silent and does not interfere with them. Right.
Right.
So you could view that as a kind of nihilistic approach to horror. It's what you see in a lot of modern horror. So, that's just what you would expect. You expect that nihilism. Now, it inverts some of the tropes, because Darker is a very based game. It looks at the world outside your window. It sees the green-haired weirdos and the people rioting in the streets and all this sort of thing, and it posits an evil behind these actions. Instead of looking to the past or to to what we think of as traditions as a source of evil, which would be more of the Gothic mindset. It looks out at what we think of as modern enlightened society and sees a deep seated corruption underneath the idea that we have abandoned God and failed to replace him with anything. And that means dark things from outside can creep into our world. Elohim goes a slightly different approach. It's not that God isn't there, he is. He's pissed. Um, and
Okay. I can see that.
basically,
I can see that. I mean, it's an understandable reaction to what we've been doing.
and he is about to end the world in fire. But you're playing in a period of time where you get a chance to do things on his behalf, and God help you, so to speak, if you do not. So Elohim's a little bit different because it takes more of the characters in Elohim will be a little more capable, and the wars they fight will be against supernatural enemies who oftentimes hide behind public speakers, leaders, captains of industry. And that's something where if people want to get a hint of what's going to be going on in Elohim, I would advise people to get Darker. It's very reasonably priced. And it's right there in the book on
And
page 30.
if I might add, when I just purchased Darker from the Red Room store, he also gave me copies of the character sheets and the basic red rules so that you have everything
Right.
you need to run the game. So kudos to
That's
Miguel
correct.
for making that a nice little bundle.
Oh, there's so much value in the package. There really is.
There is.
Now,
There
some
is.
people
And again, like
prefer.
I said, I was expecting, whatever, 100, 200, 300 pages book. It's 610 pages, this book is. There's a lot of material to be explored in there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we really, and I understand people like to have books they can hold on to. You can get this book from lulu.com
Mhm.
if you want either a soft cover or a hardcover. You can get it. I think a lot of people, especially with how things work nowadays, will be satisfied with the PDF because obviously you don't have to pay the cost of printing them. Some of the supplements I've written are only available in PDF. I think that the Black Protocol, theoretically, you can get from lulu.com as a pamphlet. I don't think Dark Corners is actually on lulu.com. I haven't really thought about checking with Miguel on that, but I mean, that's probably something if there's interest, we could have that printed. It is a little bit larger book, so it would obviously cost a little bit more. Um, but usually his material is released first on PDF, and if you want to get it from the source at the Red Room store, it's online. So you have the Red Room store online, so you can go directly to them and get their PDFs. So yeah, it's a lot of material, and a lot of my stuff is in it, and it includes the organization that people were first introduced to in the Black Protocol, which is the Sikri Scholars Foundation,
Okay.
and the Sikri Private Library. So it does have a description of that organization right alongside the Sentinel Initiative and the Arcanum, which are kind of in Darker are your major organizations. That's the other thing. Depending on what kind of game master you are and what kind of game you want to run, some of these organizations can be in some way beneficent. Some of them can be sinister. It's a matter of how you want to run it.
I believe that adds a great deal of verisimilitude to a game or a setting because just like in real life, not every, there are many, many factions like just within the church for instance, and some of them
Yeah.
might be sinister. Some of them might be quite altruistic and positive. And even within the same faction, I like the thought that there can be individuals who are going against the grain or maybe taking things in a direction you don't want to go through. Hello, DMG Photography Studio. That's
Yeah.
my buddy Dan.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, I want to emphasize, people will find it is a game aimed at adults. This is not for children. I'm not saying that, a mature teenager can't handle it. I mean, that's obviously a parental decision. And
Yeah.
let's be frank, when I was a kid and I was messing around with D&D, I liked the naked succubus picture.
Yes, I did.
So,
Yeah, me too.
yeah, it didn't
Still
it
one of
didn't
my
scar
favorites, as a
us.
matter of fact.
It didn't scar us for life. Not really. It gave us an addiction to role playing, but it's a different issue.
That
Um,
is true. That is true.
yeah, but the truth is that it is material. There's going to be some images in the book that are appropriate to modern horror. It's kind of like if you pick up Cult or some of the other modern horror books,
Mhm.
you're going to see stuff in it that could be disturbing. It's going to reference situations that could be disturbing. It's just it's like if you're going to go on into the horror section of your local bookstore and pick something up, you would expect to see horrific things described therein. And that's
Yes.
how Darker is. It is the world outside your window. It's not in the 1920s or 30s. It's not retro. It's not Delta Green in the 1990s. It is modern.
Mhm.
It's as modern as what you see going on out your window. But it what is underlying it is a awareness of forces, powers, and ancient evils. So that's why you can also play it if you want to as a kind of dark fantasy or horror fantasy type setting. If you want to, you have many different options, and it accommodates many different kind of play of styles of play. So I mean, there's any number of materials in there as well that are just there to be inspirational. And, you know, there's all kinds of stuff. There's stuff about hauntings, there's stuff about mysterious entities. There's stuff about, I mean, you have material that's both traditional and modern. Can you temper the game? Of course you can. You're always free to dial down certain things. Nothing about the game, any more than any other OSR game, nothing about the game forces you to play it a certain way. Now, there's none of this X card stuff or other silliness. But
Is is the red system still OSR compatible? It's the basic D20. We're rolling, trying
oh
to roll
yes,
high, that kind of
oh
thing.
yes, but
Neat. So it
it is
sounds like
modded
what
so
was removed was more the class and level kind of build stuff to
right,
utilize these archetypes.
right.
Makes the builds more modular, I would guess.
Yeah, and it's not as extreme as Venger. If you were to play Chalt, Venger with Advanced Crimson Dragon Slayer, his characters are very simplified. Classes are simplified. The focus is on what you do in the game, and it's much more like if you're doing ACDS, the reality is that you're going to get a lot of GM rulings because there may be things your party tries to do, and of course because of the nature of the rules, they're not explicitly spelled out. The
Mhm.
red rules are a little more detailed than that, although there is a variation on the red rules that Miguel is just starting putting out for some settings called micro red.
I
So
had noticed that, and I haven't heard it much about it. What are the deets on that?
yeah, so micro red goes even further, whereas something like darker or new flesh will have a couple of dozen or so different archetypes, lots of different options, lots of different perks, lots of different disadvantages. Micro red kind of nails all that down to a much smaller group of things suitable to the setting and suitable to fantasy role play, but not necessarily giving you the fuller uh, options that either Red or Wretched would offer in terms of the kind of character you build. It is simplified on purpose because it allows for certain settings, like for instance, Void Haven Outpost, which is a science fiction setting. That has now become a micro red setting. Now you can still use it with red. Micro red is compatible with red. So you can still use the setting with red, but if you just are interested in the setting, micro red is incorporated, and that gives you a set of rules you can use for play without having to buy anything else. It's
Is
something you
there
can grow into.
is there much of a hurdle between going back and forth between red and wretched? Could I
In
use my
my
wretched
opinion,
books?
no. Well, in my opinion, no,
Okay,
honestly, because the two systems, Red came out of Wretched.
and
So
that was my impression.
yeah, it's not a huge hurdle. There would be some changes, but the advantage is that the older books are still in print and still available. So I mean, if you really want to do conversions or back and forths, um, the reality is the books are there. I mean, Wretched is still still an existing system. It's still perfectly valid, and there's still material for it. In fact, most of the material on the Red Room store is still Wretched material. Um, Now, Red is the newer system, and that's what most of the stuff is being written for or adapted to. But it's like Wretched Bastards hasn't gone away just because Savage Swords has been released. It's still there.
Right, right.
Um, Wretched Space is still there, even though Void Haven Outpost has been released. I mean, it hasn't gone away. So, yeah, all those games are still there. They're still available, and people can still obtain them.
Do you feel on some level he's competing with himself by having Wretched and Red out
Well,
concurrently? Very not really. No.
Miguel is so productive. He's constantly accused of that, which
Uh-huh.
is that he produces so fast. And see, it's hard for me to keep up because it's like I need to finish Elohim. I need to finish Elohim. I need to finish Elohim.
Right. Yeah.
I can't move as fast as he does. He moves very fast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The sheer body of work that he has by himself up
yeah,
on the website, just he's in. I bought the Wretched book and 5 of the setting books, and they're great reads. They're fun things to read in and of themselves without even if you never get them to the actual table, they're great things to have. But yeah, he's got such an incredible volume of work that it's oh yes, Gutter from Mike. Yes. Wretched is cool. Hey, maybe on random tables I can run you through something. Hey, do a little Gutter from Mike's
yeah,
glad to have you here, man.
yeah, yeah. It's fun stuff. I think it's easy to learn, easy to get into. Um, is he competing with himself? I think what he wants to do is to have a little bit of everything for everyone. So there are going to be people who come to a setting like Wretched Bastards and they like it, but they say, I don't really want the fantasy races. And, I'm not sure. I want it more stark. I want it grittier. Well, there's Savage Swords.
Brilliant.
But if you like Savage Swords, but say, oh, wow, I really wish I had, the fantasy races too. Well, you know what? You can add them. It's not that big a deal. Um, so I think that was his real goal. His real goal is to try to give people who might be interested in his material as many options as possible. So if you can find something you like on his website, and there is a lot of stuff, then you just buy it.
Yeah.
Give it a try. Also, it's very reasonably priced. So if something like if you to give you an example, some of these settings are almost compatible. Like for instance, Wretched New Flesh and Wretched Space can in many ways be combined because it's like they're the same setting happening at different times.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that technically true? Well, no, but it because of the themes being similar, it works that way. You can easily make it work that way. Now,
Also, being
halflings are
structured the
always
way it
required.
is, being structured the way it is, I feel like Wretched is built so that you can take 2 different settings, 2 different world books, and combine them together. You can
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
It's very modular. It all builds on one another, and yet rather than like, well, I've got this, medieval Oriental city over here. I've also got a medieval European setting over here, but we can combine sci-fi with horror. We combine it with fantasy. We combine it with
oh,
modern.
absolutely,
You can go any number of directions with it.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's where you kind of get into the other issue is some people do in fact enjoy being able to mix and match. Other folks want a really strongly opinionated setting and the rules to kind of match it. And yeah, I saw that comment. Yeah. Dwarves first.
Halflings are meaningless without dwarves.
Exactly. There must be dwarves. And yeah, if you're gonna run the Winsome Winch, you gotta have dwarves to run it. There you go.
So
Anyway.
now, tell me a little bit more about your history with horror gaming. I got to play in Mothership recently. Matter of fact, I'm scheduled to play in another game this coming weekend, and that's a very fun game. Very rule simple, but comprehensive enough to get the point across, and really run by an excellent games master.
That always helps.
Yeah.
That always helps. So yeah, I've played various horror games, mostly Call of Cthulhu.
Mhm.
Um, I also played Stormbringer back in the day, which is not technically a horror game, but the way we ended up playing it, it was very much like one.
I
Um,
I can see that. I touched on Stormbringer at one point, and from what I recall, demons feature very heavily into it.
oh yeah,
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 so
yeah,
uh, there is a degree to which horror just feels built into it.
yeah. I mean, there's always been that element of horror in pulp fantasy as well.
Mhm.
The Tower of the Elephant contains several horrific episodes. Um, So yeah, and that's not surprising. I mean, Robert E. Howard was a member of the Lovecraft Circle. So
Yeah, no.
that's actually quite common. And um, so I think that what you'll probably find is that if I were to look at my history, it all goes back to Call of Cthulhu, which I found sitting on a shelf. And that kind of was the first time I really thought that you could play a role-playing game involving horror. Now, most of the campaigns, such as they were fairly short, and you couldn't get too terribly attached to your characters because they might end up in a loony bin or dead.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
that kind of informed my impressions of horror role-playing. I played in a Ravenloft campaign once, and that was an attempt to meld horror with fantasy role play.
Okay, okay.
So there's that. Now it was a little more gothic, and I do remember also in the '90s, the late '90s, early 2000s, there was an AD&D second edition campaign that was run by the now defunct RPGA,
Hmm,
um,
okay,
which was associated with TSR.
I remember that.
And then later briefly with Wizards before Hasbro shut down. But they had released a supplement that was meant to be connected to Ravenloft, but it took place in the late Victorian era in the 1890s, and it was called Mask of the Red Death.
I know. I've heard of it. I've not played it myself, but I have heard of it.
And that was pretty fascinating. I only got to play one or two sessions of that because the only opportunities I had were in the RPGA campaign, and the truth is they shut it down not too long after third edition came out. But it was fascinating. And it was a classic example of them taking a rules system that was not really designed for what they were wanting to use it for and turning it into the basis of a horror role-playing game. Now it was Victorian horror, it was your classic monsters, but it was a horror role-playing game. I did not hear about Cult in the '90s. I know that's when Cult got its start.
That's when
It
I first
was
encountered it. Yeah.
I always thought of it as being more a European phenomenon. I didn't really know much about it.
Yes, yeah, a very European. I actually came to it by way of the Mutant Chronicles war games that came from the same company, the same property, which I still have several of those. And I never owned a copy of Cult myself, but I did play it once way
Yeah.
back in high school or early college days. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But I've heard a lot of good things about the newer editions of Cult. I'm not sure if they if that's held up over time, but like Seth Skorkowski, as it for instance, does many videos where he talks about Cult and the adventures he's played in it.
Yeah. And it was the original version was very influential for Miguel. And if you read his foreword to Darker, I think one of the things you'll soon figure out is that this is part of the reason he was influenced to write Darker in the first place, was because he had enjoyed the original Cult, and then the fourth edition came out and it had lots of issues. He did not care for it. He particularly didn't care for the Powered by the Apocalypse system that they used for the newer game edition. And
Okay.
Darker was kind of his OSR response. And he might have written the book sooner, but other books were written first for various reasons. And so there was kind of a, if you want to talk about the settings that I think Miguel really, really loves, he's been writing some of those lately. New Flesh is one of them. He really, really loves the work of David Lynch. Darker is another one. Darker is kind of it's one of his opuses in terms of his perspective on how you design a game and how you handle horror themes in a game. So that's what kind of
Mhm.
pulled me into it, is because I bought it and looked at it and it's like, wow, I really like this. And then I started creating content for it. So I've probably done more horror gaming recently than I had done in a very long time, because most of my gaming had either been traditional tabletop fantasy role play, mostly D&D, but lately more OSR.
Mhm.
And I also played in science fiction games, which usually were Traveller, which is
Right.
another great old game from the late
Yeah.
70s, early 80s.
Generally, I think you have to honestly say it's the best sci-fi game out there. I think it's got a very loyal following, and it's got a very functional rule set that covers.
A lot.
I can't think of another sci-fi game that even holds a candle to it.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever played or encountered chill in your role-playing career?
I never played Chill. I heard about it, but
Okay.
I never played it.
So that's one that was my first horror game back in the 80s, the original Pace Setter box set, which I loved that game. It was a very, very simplistic game, but lent itself to a lot of fun. And I bought one of the more recent hardback books, and there was a charm in the original system, because sort of like the old Marvel face rip game, they had a universal table that you use for all your die rolls, and and you use that to interpret the results based upon how much you won by and such like. So it was a very fun game in that way, and all the charm left it in later editions. I have it on my shelf, but I'm not motivated to play it because something was lost to it. It's a sad thing.
No, I know what you mean. I oftentimes feel that updates to games have not always been successful.
Yes.
I didn't really get into GURPS Traveler. I didn't really get into
Hmm.
some of the other, even Traveler Hero, as much as I love Champions, just didn't really do it for me.
I
That's
can
another
get that.
game, Champions, which I loved to death when I first encountered it. It was okay for a while, and then later changes kind of wasn't as enthusiastic about it.
And now I still have all my third edition stuff from like the late '80s on my shelf. And that was probably the crunchiest game system that my buddies and I played a good amount of. And very similar to what you said. I've seen some stuff, some of the things that I've seen in modern days I like, but I don't know. I feel like maybe the world got left behind, the world building stuff like that. Like if you've ever played the Champions Online MMO, from what I've heard from people, it's the character building is very similar to what you do with pen and paper, but Of course, the gameplay is very different because it's an MMO.
Right.
But it seems like they did a few things that I generally agree with, like eliminating the distinction between physical damage and energy damage. It was kind of pointless, didn't need to be there. So it's all, instead of having physical defense and energy defense, you now just have defense, you know. But yeah, a few of the things I've liked, but Champions is one of those things that it's a great game when everybody at the table knows it well and it hums along lightly. And I think that's probably the story with any game system, you know, no matter how complex. If you're playing Rune Quest and everybody at the table though knows the rules and knows the character sheets, the game moves along really nicely. It's a bit more painful with novices or people new to the system, in my experience.
Yeah. No, I agree. And although, you know, when I had it in the box set, and I had the original box set, and it was brand new, I managed to figure it out. Once you do learn it, it was tremendous fun. Especially it introduced
Yes.
how you could game certain tropes from the comic books, like knockback.
Yep.
And you know, it
Yep.
actually had game mechanics, and it that gave you that kind of comic book feel. I always thought of it as being a lot of fun. I know there's a lot of people who prefer the phaser rip system and stuff like Marvel superheroes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know, I had Marvel superheroes, and it to me it just wasn't the same. I always preferred Champions, but that's another game I just haven't played in a long time.
I can understand that. I can understand that. Now, World of Darkness, what's your exposure to that, since we're on the horror kick?
Ah, you mean Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Ascension, all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. Yeah, I only ever encountered that as LARPs. I would be sitting there playing my D&D at a convention, and there'd be a bunch of people dressed up in outfits and running around and doing rock, paper, scissors, and I had no idea why. And then I found out, oh yeah, that's Vampire the Masquerade. They're doing the LARP, and for a long time, that's all I knew about it. I didn't even realize that there was a game put out by White Wolf about Vampire the Masquerade, and the
Yeah.
storyteller system. The storyteller
Yep.
system.
Yep.
So I think that's where you kind of get your first concept of story gaming is from Vampire the Masquerade and those other games they put out of the original World of Darkness.
Yeah, I
Um,
would definitely say so. It was definitely one of the first games that intentionally put heavy focus on the narrative elements of a game. And it's something that I personally have a lot of experience in those rule sets and with running a LARP myself.
yeah. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's fun. You just have to bear in mind its limitations. Exposed and
Pun
World of
King!
Darkness together. Yeah.
Thanks for coming, Pun King. I'm glad to have you here.
Um, so, but again, you know, not a there was a period of time from the I would guess the late 80s up through about 2000 when I didn't game very much. And
Mhm.
then third edition came out, and it's suddenly wow, you know, D&D was cool again, and you know, you could find people who actually wanted to play, and you had the RPGA and Living Greyhawk and lots of other things. And people got very busy playing games. Um, so that pulled me back into gaming, and since then I've been on and off doing it ever since again. And you know, that also gave me the opportunity to get me back into doing other kinds of gaming. Although to be honest with you, I played an awful lot of D&D. That's
Mhm.
that I would say that for the first decade of the 2000s, that was probably my primary game was D&D. And I knew of other games, of course, because some of them I'd played years before. And I even knew of some of the new games coming out, but I just hadn't paid much attention to them until there was the whole debacle with fourth edition. And then suddenly you've got a reason to look at stuff like basic fantasy role play or Labyrinth Lord or Swords and Wizardry.
Old
And that's
school
how,
essentials.
yeah, old school essentials. That's how I got into the OSR. And there's some great stuff there. I have the new Axe material in hardback, and
Yeah, me too.
maybe
I
one of
just
these,
got mine.
yeah, maybe one of these days I'll even get to play it. But at least I have the books for now. I've been playing much more Red Room stuff than anything else right now. So, we've done Savage Swords. We actually have living characters who we can pick back up with. Um, have been doing some darker. Have been doing some new flesh. We just did get through doing a session built around the new Conspiracy Files game, which is the
Right.
red version of Wretched Conspiracies.
Okay. I was
Um,
just looking at that earlier today.
yeah, and that was fun. So if you're somebody who's kind of into the 1990s X Files stuff or other conspiracy based shows, this is definitely right up your alley. Um, and there's a lot of material coming out. There will be more material coming out before too much longer. Um, that will, I mean, there's a he's already released a red version of Belle Epoque. So that one's out. If you like the idea of doing role play in a kind of weird version of the 1890s, particularly in Europe, perhaps in Paris, there's Wretched Epoque. Um, or it's no longer Wretched Epoque; it's now Belle Epoque. Uh, there's there's just so much material coming and more yet coming out. And Yeah, I mean, and you will of course continue to see some material from me in some of these books as they're released, because I've got a lot of stuff on the Red Room server that I've created at various times. But of
Mhm.
course, I am starting to publish some of the material through the Red Room now, like Elohim, like the Bellic session. I don't know. People who go to the Red Room YouTube channel might see that there was a game we played. It was a game based on the darker RPG system called the Bellic session that involved material from the Black Protocol, or that was influenced by it at least, and kind of gave an example of how you could make use of some of the supplements like the Black Protocol to create your own games and scenarios. But I will be turning the Bellic session into a scenario. There's another one I have called the Solitary House that I'll be working on. That's a little farther down the line. So there's lots of material.
Nice, nice. So, you were talking about there's some production delays, scheduling stuff like that. But do you anticipate having Elohim published this year, or is this more of a 2026 product we're looking for?
Oh no, Elohim will be coming out, I hope, within a month anyway. So I plan to
Very
kind of
nice.
grind through it and make it happen. But it's like I said, I would have already had it done, but the press of real life has alas cut into my time for
Yes,
gaming and for
real life.
writing game material. Yeah, and I am years away yet from retirement, so that's just not an option for me. I play with a lot of retired people, and they say, if you were retired, you wouldn't have these issues. And it's like, yeah, but I also wouldn't have any income. But so there you
Well,
go.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's that thing. If we can lick that income issue, hey, maybe if we can get enough people buying your stuff, then the retirement will be good.
Exactly. I could
Needs to
do what
retire.
Gary Gygax did and start writing novels on in addition to publishing game material, and maybe somebody will pick it up and option it as a movie. You never know. You
You
never know.
too can be pushed out of the company you founded.
Exactly. So there you go. Yep.
How did you find your way to the Red Room stuff initially? How did you make that introduction? Was it something you stumbled across online, or did you meet Miguel in a dark, shady inn somewhere?
No, it just happened. I mean, I happened to come across their material, bought some of their books, got on the Discord server, um, started talking to them about various things, and I just hang out there a lot, and that's how it
Mhm.
happened. It really is not anything unusual. It's just I found a gaming group, and here we are. Um, So we just happen to be a bunch of gamers who actually, many of us, create some kind of material to go along with our, to give other gamers tools to play with. So several of
Seems to
the
be
people on the
common amongst
server,
our hobby, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. It
Everybody's got a
does.
book in them.
Well, the OSR has kind of freed up people to be creative. It used to be there was a strong emphasis on official materials,
Yes.
reading,
Yes.
books, buying books from certain sources. I mean, I remember back in the day, we had a hobby shop called Hungate's Hobbies. And back during my diehard traveler period, I would save up my money and head over to Hungate's. And if there was a new traveler supplement, I'd buy it. And, that's how it used to be. Nowadays, it's more a matter of people get what they want. They use it how they want it. Sometimes they just create it themselves. And that's a nice one. Everyone's got a book in them and a lifetime ban from Barnes and Noble. That's cute. It's very cute.
He speaks from personal experience.
Yeah, I find books don't taste very good.
The real question is, what hurt worse, the stretch marks or the paper cuts?
Yeah, no kidding.
Don't get
So
greedy. Grow at a slow pace. Never go public in the search for growth capital.
there you go. There you go. But yeah, it's
Off-grid wisdom.
yep. So that's the thing about it is I think a lot of people have that desire to exercise their creativity. It comes out in different ways. Some people, they love creating random tables and they can sit down and come up with a lot of random tables and they use them themselves and they share them with their friends. Some
That's
people write
fun.
stories.
Yeah.
Some people create settings. Some people create towns. There's a lot to be done. And at the end of the day, the most basic form of creativity is just the stuff that you would create for your own games and share with your friends. That's
I think
kind of
it's
how it started for me. I was just sharing things with friends.
no, that makes sense. And there's no denying, I think, that this hobby attracts people with a creative urge, like because there's so much creativity just in making up a character, and animating their actions, deciding what they do. I don't think it's really any surprise that so many people who engage with this hobby want to contribute in some way. They have their own ideas that they want to get out, you know. And
Yeah.
now, one of the things that inspired this in the first place was the announcement from Miguel that he was giving you co-writing credits on Darker. And that's, I wanted to set this up and talk to you about that. So tell me a little bit about how that came about. Where did those materials come from? Did you make a spreadsheet of a bunch of notes and send them to Miguel, or did he
No,
actually?
I've been getting co-writing credits since New Flesh.
Okay,
So New Flesh, Savage Swords, and Darker. And it's largely because the materials I provided right there on the server.
got it.
He really liked that. He wanted to incorporate it. He wanted to make it part of the game because that was something that he likes and thinks that Cult did get right, is the idea of giving atmosphere and content that can be inspirational as to how you run your game. Because I think that's one of the more difficult things for a lot of people coming to the hobby is that not everybody has an extensive background having read the original materials that inspire the games.
Yeah.
So particularly with younger players who've never read some of these, there's a lot of people who play Call of Cthulhu who I probably have never read very much Lovecraft.
I played
Um,
the game before I read a single story.
yeah, and the question becomes, how do you get them into the setting? Um, well, the answer is that you provide materials in the game that give them inspiration and thought about what the setting is like and what the kind of different things are that you can do within it. So, to give you an example, in Darker itself, I have an inspiration in the book that is basically a story about a revenant, a vengeful ghost or a vengeful corpse. But I also have a story about objects created by an occultist in the 19th century. and how those have subsequently been passed down to another organization because the original occultist died under mysterious circumstances. Um, when you have this range of pieces that are meant to pull you into the setting, it gives you both a sense of where the game can go, but it also gives you the opportunity to say, you know what, I like certain ideas in that, and I'm going to use that to do this. So it's something that pulls you into the setting. It gives you an idea of the world that you can be playing in, and it can help to inspire further creativity in how the game is run. And that is, I think, what helps. It helps people to see this is what the game is. This is what it's about. These are the situations you can get into. It's like not everybody. Miguel is from Portugal, and he's very influenced by Italian horror, by certain kinds of horror that is peculiar to Europe. Not everybody's seen this material. Not everybody's seen Sergio Argento. Not everybody's seen Suspiria. That's more of a European phenomenon. So, but you can get an idea from the stories that you find in Darker of what that world is and all the different options you have. The world of horror is very broad. So, I
Yes.
mean, you could have slasher type material, you could have a kind of weird science, you could have witchcraft, you could have demons, you could have traditional monsters. It's
Classic
all in there.
Frankenstein and Wolfman
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
Go to the
just
old
just
Universal
updated to
route.
the modern day. And Darker does have, as I've mentioned before, in the Silence of God, it does have a theme. So this is a modern horror setting where, so underlying Victorian horror, and there is a separate game that they have for that called Gothic,
Mhm.
that Miguel put out. So in Gothic literature, horror is the result of seeing the past from the perspective of a present that is deemed better, right? So the
Mhm.
classic example is Castle of Otranto, and there's all this weird medieval superstitious stuff, and then of course it all gets explained later in the story what was really going on, and that's classically Gothic because it's the superstitious past intruding upon the current present. Now, as time went on, Gothic literature began to acquire almost more of an ambivalence about the interaction of the modern world and the past. But that was still characteristic of Gothic literature until you get into the period around World War One and the Lost Generation, and that's where you start to get into more, I would say, modernist horror, where there's still this kind of belief in science and in the benefits of modern life.
Mhm.
But then now it's kind of with Lovecraft, you've almost got this vague awareness that modernity has created its own monsters. And when you look at creatures like Cthulhu or Hastur or Shub-Niggurath or Azathoth, these are immortal beings of tremendous alien power to whom humans are but a blip in the space of time. Uh, when Lovecraft encountered the concept of geological time, he realized that it made humans and everything they might ever do completely irrelevant.
Mhm.
And that's where the concept of cosmic horror comes in. In cosmic horror, you encounter something that you probably can't understand because it's beyond your understanding. It's going to do whatever it's going to do. And the truth is, you don't matter ultimately in
Mhm.
that universe. There's stories like the curious case of Charles Dexter Ward, where you've got a guy who's literally time traveling across the universe. Um, and, you know, the horror comes in part from the intersection between a super science so advanced that's effectively black magic from a human perspective. And that's what books like the Necronomicon represent. They represent this occult knowledge. But whereas in Gothic literature, these would be superstitious works of demonology and witchcraft. In Lovecraft's works, these are actually coded coded grimoires that give you access to a super science that humans cannot normally understand but can access and use so long as they interact with the beings who control it. With darker, darker is takes it kind of beyond the modernism altogether, and any notion of any notion of positivity about modernity or society is gone. There's no, it's like, you look out your door and it is a dumpster fire world. And that is much more the modern horror approach. It is supremely cynical about the benefits of modernity and and suspicious as to whether the modern is really that different from things that have happened in the past anyway. And that's the other thing, is that it kind of inverts the whole concept behind Gothic literature. The past being looked at might well actually be better than the present.
Okay.
In the case of Darker, for instance, the death of God means that there's no force that can resist the things from outside that crawl in. So this is where the nihilistic tinge comes from. Now, it's not postmodernist. It views postmodernism itself as a form of horror. That's what makes it kind of based. And again, you have the alternative setting, which I'm working on, Elohim, which takes that further. This is a world that will end shortly in fire, and what you're really hoping to do is escape, but there's a price. Um, so this is different yet again from, say, Cult Forth, Cult Divinity Lost, with its Gnostic horror, where well, everyone's a god, but not everyone knows they are, because the demiurge is keeping you down.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing it. I'm paraphrasing it.
That's a pretty good
Um,
summation of Gnosticism as I understand it. So
yeah, it's
good
it's
enough for
like,
game purposes.
if you have the secret knowledge, you can escape, maybe.
Yeah.
But everybody else is
Let's just
kind of
hope where you're going is better.
exactly. Everybody else is doomed. So there you go.
So if you
So
had to describe it, in what ways does Darker different? What does Darker do better than other horror games? You were giving us a little tidbit right there with the
oh, I think it is
inverting
much. Yeah,
Gothic.
I think it is much better at representing the themes that you would see in kind of the classic horror films of the late 60s, the 70s, early 80s, where you've got themes that make no judgments about the validity of past and present. It's not purely Gothic horror. It's not just monsters. It's um, it's a world where bad things happen. They don't necessarily happen for a reason, and the supernatural is real, and it's right outside your door. That's what Darker does. It's the world outside your door. Yes, it is imagined with all the monstrosities that you would associate with horror literature. But these are things that coexist with electric vehicles and space shuttles and computers, all the things you would expect in the modern world. You can literally look out your window and see what's going on in the world and turn it into a darker scenario. What's really going on when that building burned down? This cult that you've heard about where some people got arrested, what was it really about? Um, Mysterious deaths, mysterious disappearances all become, and this is straight out of the headlines, and it all becomes grist for the mill, because Darker is meant to be horror in the modern world and horror in a modern context, a contemporary context. It is very based, so it takes a perspective that is quite different from some games, in that it views the decline of the West as a source of horror, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of key to the themes in Darker, is that the decline of the West, the fading of the Christian religion, um, has created a time of chaos when demons can masquerade behind human faces, when monsters can do horrific things and people will pay it no mind because they have been habituated to the idea that the horrible is somehow normal, that there is no normal. It gets into the psychological aspects of horror, right? So you're living in this terrible world of people who do bad things, and oftentimes there isn't a reason. Evil is real, and the present is not necessarily better than the past. So it turns the Gothic on its head, but it also turns modernism and postmodernism on their heads. It's viewing both through this lens that could be seen as nihilistic, but it's not nihilism in the sense of abnegating values. It's nihilism in the sense that you are seeing the world collapse in real time, and nothing is going to stop it when it happens. God is silent, and the collapse continues. So you have your characters just happen to be, say, you have a group of people in a diner in an isolated area outside a major city by several miles. Why are they there? Maybe they're there because it's just a place for them to eat while they're traveling down the road, and then the lights go out. What happens after that? Are the monsters monsters, or are the monsters people being monstrous? There's any number of things that you could do in Darker, but Darker, you do have the supernatural, but how you interact with it doesn't have to be the way you interact with it in Victorian literature. It doesn't have to be boogeymen that you're fighting. In fact, maybe you don't want to fight them. Maybe fighting them is lethal. What you're really trying to do is hide.
And yeah, that leads me into thinking, because I wanted to pick your brain as somebody who's played and run a lot of horror games over the year, of exactly what are the tips that you give. And this is one of them. This is talking about how it almost seems like in a horror setting, the supernatural elements, the more restrained and subtle they are, the more effective they are on affecting the psyche of the players. Do you find that
That can be true. The key thing is to pull people into the setting and get them to be invested in it. There's different techniques for doing that. You can have a really strong supernatural element, but if you're going to do that, it needs to be weird and incomprehensible so that it's not something that people can overcome through thinking their way through the situation? When I think about that, I think about um, the kind of horror that comes from non-comprehension. The fact that you are confronted with something that you don't really understand, that you can't really control, and that you're completely unprepared for. And that is, I think, a common theme in a lot of, particularly of modern horror, is the ordinary person caught in an absolutely unimaginable situation. And part of the problem they run into is the fact they have a difficult time believing it's happening, um, because this just doesn't happen. They step out of the normal world. They're in this dark place, and they don't even know how they got there. And so I think you can make a particularly strong tinge of the supernatural work, but it has to be done in a way that leaves them unprepared for it when it arrives. The problem with playing with like your standard World of Darkness type of vampire or werewolves type game is that the monsters are familiar. You feel like you know them.
that's a key difference too, which is, while there are horror elements to all the World of Darkness games, I've found that they're not in they're not about the horror themselves, horror being inflicted on the characters as
Right.
much. Vampire has the strongest themes in that direction, whereas most horror games, Call of Cthulhu, Chill, Darker, you're playing the people in the world who have to contend with these monsters, and that leads to a
Yeah.
very much more horror infused situation in my mind.
Yeah, and Darker does give you the option. It does contain rules towards the end of the book where if you want to play vampires or werewolves or other
Okay, so yeah, so
non-humans, you can. I don't think that would be a typical Darker campaign, but you could easily do it. I mean, Darker, after all, gives you the opportunity to be a ritual magician as well. So you could
yeah,
be, for
yeah,
instance, a black magician or a traditional ritualist or even
okay,
a shaman. Um, is that is that going to work as a horror campaign? Well, it depends upon the themes, but to me, isolation, um, an inability to overcome, basically you can't confront the evil, whatever it is, directly. You might be able to confront a lesser evil. You might be able to confront a minion, but the greater evil cannot be defeated by ordinary means, or at least not by means that are available to the player in the situation that they
mhm,
are in. It makes a world of difference. Equipment makes a big deal. So the whole point of
yeah,
a horror game is that you have people who are going into a situation, they think it's one thing, it turns out to be something else. They're completely unprepared for it. And how they then respond to the situation is oftentimes what compounds the horror. Whether it's the person hiding in the
right,
corner, hoping they won't be noticed by the hideous, hulking, shambling thing walking through the darkness that they can never fully see, or they hear these strange moans and cries in a dark old house, and they can't see anything, but clearly something is there. And there they are standing in the middle of a room with holes in the floors and tattered furniture. And what do they do next? There's so many different ways to do horror, but I think you have to kind of create this sense of there's no outside help coming. And that's, I think, why Miguel focused on the Silence of God concept, is that this is a world where horrible things can happen. And not only might it be the case that people don't know about it, but even worse, even if they do know about it, what they know about it may be wrong. They may even approve. I mean, this is the thing. It forces you to confront the nature of human evil. It's very easy to create monsters and make them the source of evil. But what if the source of evil is really human beings? Maybe you have a cult that's working with some vile monster, or even has one under the control. That can be a source of horror and can be something that would be a good darker scenario. Um, there's lots of stuff like that, to be frank.
what are some of your most successful tricks and hooks that you've used over the years to bring people into a setting and an adventure like this? Maybe
There's a couple of different things. You can have handouts that like show people images or stuff like props, like maybe a letter or notes. That helps. You could also have one of the most basic elements is to have it be strongly thematic.
Mhm.
Make sure that they encounter mysteries that are difficult to understand. There should be things that happen that can't really be explained. Um, it never hurts if you're going to run a tabletop role playing game to have music in the background anyway. And obviously, if you get the
Yes.
right background music, that can make things very creepy. It's a little harder to do online, but there are people who do that. Like in Discord channels, they'll have a bot that runs a certain list of songs or music or sound effects in
Yeah,
the
I've been through
background.
that recently. One of the players had a bot that could play ambient music for us. It really, really does help the session.
Yeah, it's not a new idea. I know, like for instance, when third edition came out, they had a soundtrack that you could get by someone called Midnight Syndicate.
Yes, I
That
remember. Yep.
so so it's whatever you can do to get people pulled into the setting. I know that we've been playing through a cult campaign with Abraham L. Jaguar, and he really insists on presenting all your actions by your character in first person present. It being his contention that forces you to engage with the setting. I will admit, I found it difficult to do. I'm not used to expressing myself that way in a game. Um, so yeah, and there's a lot of ways for you to get people pulled in, but the most basic one is you have to remember, if you're running a horror game, the characters need to be isolated, and that either means they're actually isolated or something about the situation isolates them and cuts them off from people outside the group. They have to be isolated. They have to be incapable of directly confronting the threat. And they have to have something that creates a sense of tension, whether it's limited time frame, limited options, a limited space, something. The idea is that you take away most of the things that make a heroic fantasy game work.
Right.
You
Yes.
remove those, and it becomes much easier to sell the horror game.
Yeah, vis-a-vis, similar, like in Call of Cthulhu, as you were just intimating, the confront the evil head on usually leads to your quick and messy death.
Yeah,
right?
it's a bad idea.
Right. So, somebody, a barbarian with a two-handed sword is a very different animal than a investigator with an old school camera. But yeah, it's a very different. In Call of Cthulhu, I see where a lot of times the evil is so deadly that confronting it directly just does you in. Are there other ways that you've found to enforce that? What are other methods to discourage head-on solutions?
Well, if you have the scenario designed correctly, I tend to favor letting characters do pretty much whatever they want, and they may choose to do the wrong thing and die. But I think the key is to kind of give good scenario design, if you can, that allows and kind of react to their actions, whatever they are, and allows them to undertake a course of action, but they will need to deal with the consequences of that action, whatever it is. And if you set the scenario up correctly, there's going to be a natural tendency for them to follow along with, so to speak, the plot. So if you present somebody with a haunted house on the outside of town and they're supposed to investigate it, that right there kind of gives you what you're looking for, right? You have a limited space that they're going to be operating in. They enter the building, maybe something happens so that they can't leave. Maybe the windows slam shut and the doors lock, and now suddenly they can't leave the building. So again, it just gets back to the same themes you would expect in horror, because the real goal, in addition to everybody just having fun, which of course is always the goal with these games, is to make sure that the premises underlying the horror game are preserved. They're not real capable. They're facing something that kind of is incomprehensible in some ways, and save the ultimate reveal for a kind of climactic moment, so that there comes a point where they finally encounter the evil in some way in its naked form, and that becomes the point where either the TPK happens, or people survive, and the darkness is not necessarily defeated, but it's pushed back for a day. That can be the difference between a horror campaign and a dark fantasy campaign, is how effectual is whatever you do. In a true, strict, stark horror game, what you do will not matter much, except maybe can guarantee your own survival. In a dark fantasy game, presumably you have goals that you may not achieve the entire goal, but you will do something, and will push back the darkness in some way. So that's a big difference, I think. I think a lot of people would argue that World of Darkness is not truly horror role playing, except in its themes. In other words, it's
Yes.
horror monsters, it's a horror world, but it's not really a horror game. It's a dark fantasy game because, especially if you're playing a vampire, well, you are the Boogan, but that's
Right.
okay because your real opponents are the other Boogans, and you know, it's
Yeah,
more like
which
a
is
game of
the tension set up in the original world, which is, many other people have talked about that, when the five different main games, or whichever supernatural creature you're talking about in World of Darkness, they're all pretty much kill on sight to the other. Yeah, so if you've got werewolves and vampires coexisting in the same game, you're kind of playing wrong. You really are.
yeah. It's more dark fantasy because they're able to fight one another, whereas ordinary humans would have no chance with any of them. So
Yes, Thunder Moose is also in the mothership game that I was referencing, and he is absolutely correct. We have to, you do have to game the android's loyalty, because none of us wants to be dismembered by the synthetic life form.
yeah. So and that reminds me a lot of, like, there's games like Paranoid where you have that as well. I would not consider Paranoid a horror game per se, but the situation is certainly horrific.
Yes,
Um,
it's a horrific comedy, is what
yeah,
Paranoia is. Now, in
yeah.
most horror games, it seems to be my experience, my perception, that there's always a degree of mystery to it. There's an investigation, there's something, a story or something that's trying to be uncovered. Is that your experience as well?
It depends. I mean, there's always going to be an element of the unknown, but the question is the thing that's unknown, does it have a story element, or is it simply something? It's like in Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. It's just something that came out of the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it comes, it
And you never get
kills.
much in the way of answers about it.
Exactly. It comes, it kills, and then it goes away. And the truth is, you don't even know if it noticed any of the things it did when it did them. And to make matters worse, at the end of the original story, even as the color escaped back into space, a tiny little part of it fell back into the well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the tension comes from the fact that that patch of gray, where everything is dead and lifeless, as though its life force has been sucked out of it, is slowly growing and has been growing for decades. And that's now I never did get a chance to watch the Nicolas Cage adaptation,
It was
but
good. I liked it.
I do remember the original Lovecraft story very well. It's one of his better ones, and that is the horror at the heart of that one. It's not so much mystery, a thing that can be uncovered. It's the unknown, a thing that really can't be. All you can see is what it does.
Yeah.
Um,
It's more
that's
than unknown, it's unknowable.
Yeah, it's very creepy. And I do think that the weird and the creepy play a role in helping to increase people's engagement with the horror aspect of the game if you're going to play a horror RPG.
And before we move on, I just want to mention that The Color from Outer Space had a low budget interpretation film that was done that was much more loyal to the original story. It was filmed in black and white. The only color in it was that creepy, eerie pink that got inserted in the parts of the story where you see the color.
Huh.
But it was very good, very loyal to the original story.
Was this the Boris Karloff one?
No, this came out in more like the early 2000s or 2010s. It's not that
Oh,
old, but it's
okay.
good 10, 15 years old.
Gotcha.
And yeah, I wasn't aware that Boris Karloff did an interpretation either. So
They did one that was done under a different title, and
uh,
I don't think it was very faithful, but that was what it was based on. It was based on The Color Out of Space.
yeah,
I would have to go
that's
look it up.
very true of that day. I mean, how true was Dracula to the original book? fairly,
Yeah,
but
they
not
made some changes. They
yeah,
made some
yeah.
changes. Yeah.
Which going from particularly at that time, taking a story into film, you can understand. I can give a little bit of leeway for budgetary constraints, and they just don't have the special effects to do certain things.
Well, and also to be perfectly frank, oftentimes they feel like they can make more money if they change certain aspects of the story, get more people in the theaters watching it.
Well, this Color Out of Space story is really great, but you know what it needs? It needs titties, big titties. That's what it
Yeah, well, I
needs.
have no problem with that. Ugh,
We'll sell tickets.
exactly.
All right. So now we've talked a bit about the Elohim coming out soon within the next month. We're looking forward to that. What is in the future for you? What do you have going on, and what would you like to have on your plate for the future? What are our dreams? What are our aspirations?
At the present time, just the opportunity to put more stuff out, maybe do more writing. Maybe one of these days I'll actually start writing some novels or other actual fiction material rather than just game material. Who knows?
Got it. Well,
Um,
I think you've certainly got the itch for it. You've got the chops because I've seen your work on the Discord. So, it definitely put that on your list of things to do.
I'm thinking about it. I've thought about how would I get into it? What approach would I take? This I think one of the things a lot of people need to understand is that if you get into this and do it for any reason other than you enjoy it, you're doing it wrong because
Yeah,
it's not the best way in the world to make a living.
it
Most
is.
people who are doing this stuff do it because they enjoy it. If
Yeah.
they can make a living, great, but it's
Yeah,
not
no shade on
guaranteed.
anybody who can, and heck, who in the space doesn't wish they could do it that way, right? Let's be honest about that. If I could be doing
It's
this instead of my day job, I'd be doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And wouldn't we all? But the reality is that, I will probably continue to be having my day job and doing this on the side, and that's actually fine. The key thing is if people enjoy what you're doing, and if you enjoy what you're doing, that can be enough in itself. And hey, you never know. The day may
That's the
come
true
when you create that
motivation.
one thing that everybody wants, but it's not something you plan on.
Got it. Got it. Now, I open up the floor to you. Is there anything that you would like to say in conclusion? Is there other uh, upcoming events or products you want to plug? And where can people find you?
Oh, well, of course, I'm on X, but if you're really wanting to find me in the game group, go to the Red Room Discord server. You can easily get us and join us. We're a very based bunch. I mean, there's lots of talk about the games, there's lots of talk about supplementation, there's lots of talk about other materials. And, the reality is, if you want to find my stuff, at least for now, it's going to be on the Red Room game server, and folks will be able to download it, buy it, whatever. That's what I would really encourage people to do is to go to the Red Room server and take a look at what's on available there. You can find the Black Protocol. The Black Protocol is free if you want to get a taste of the sort of things I do. Dark Corners is very reasonably priced. Darker is very reasonably priced. So that's what I would really encourage people to do right now. Just go to the Red Room Games server and buy some stuff. You'll enjoy it, you'll enjoy reading it, and you get a lot for your money.
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great plug. Miguel should be happy.
He should be.
He should be. He should be.
Yep.
I'm expecting that check to arrive in my mailbox anytime, Miguel. Anytime.
There you go.
My rates are very reasonable. So reasonable. Can't find
Yeah.
somebody with more reasonable rates. All right. But again, OSR Dwarf, thank you for joining me on here. I think we've about hit the end of the conversation, so we'll go ahead and wrap up here. You can be found on Twitter at OSR Dwarf and OSR Dwarf 2. I know those. And if you like what I'm doing here, you can find me on Twitter at JP McCarthy JR. And also here on all three of my channels, we're streaming to X, we're streaming to Rumble, and we're streaming to YouTube all at the same time. So you can get me in all three spots. And Next Monday, come back and join us again in another episode of Jawin with Jack, where I talk with the Ultra TTRPGer about his most recent, his first role-playing credit, which is Wretched Dixie, the module, written for the Wretched system. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and have a good night, sir.
You too.